Welcome back, focused learners. Okay, so I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today for a brand new explainer. We're taking a really fascinating journey today. We're going to zoom all the way out to examine these massive, extractive digital economies that we literally participate in every single day. And then we're going to zoom all the way into the microscopic, sovereign mathematical ecosystems that might just be the ultimate solution to all of it. We're exploring how the literal, physical architecture of computer chips actually connects to the multi-million-dollar strategies of modern venture capital. I know, it sounds a little wild, but stick with me, because by the end of this, the underlying architecture of trust is going to make perfect sense.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to start with the architecture of extraction, look at the casino versus the vineyard funding models, define Providence VC, explore text as a semiotic bridge, and wrap up with the Agentic Publishing House. Let's get right into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the architecture of extraction, and how terms of service are actually a zero-sum tool. To understand the solution, we've got to neutrally map out the current problem of digital rent extraction. Our sources point out that modern platforms usually follow a very predictable S-curve. When a platform is brand new, it's in its bootstrapping phase. This is highly positive sum. They offer free tools, open APIs. They're basically your best friend trying to recruit you. But the second they hit the top of that S-curve, things change. They enter the extraction phase. The walls go up, and the relationship suddenly turns entirely zero-sum. And how exactly do they do this? Well, through the terms of service, or TOS. The sources describe TOS not just as some boring formality you scroll past, but as the actual legal architecture of extraction. These documents routinely grant platforms irrevocable, worldwide licenses to your intent, your training data, even your vocal identity. The sources call this a royalist compute model. It's essentially a digital landlord system where human memories and private logic are just treated as taxable property by the platform. Moving on to Section 2, Casino versus the Vineyard. Let's look at the venture capital clash behind all of this.
I want to share this rather brutal analogy straight from our sources. They don't really care if the horse is killed as long as there is one winning. We're reading this objectively to establish the reality of the old system. The intense pressure of the venture capital power law often means founders and their companies are treated kind of like disposable lottery tickets. The priority is rapid scale, not fundamental stability.
And the sources define this specific, aggressive approach as liquidator VC. It operates exactly like a Las Vegas casino floor. It's a model entirely obsessed with quick multiples, placing rapid bets, and riding these speculative hype cycles. It abandons fundamental first principles value creation because it's chasing fast exits, and that often leaves a wake of burned-out talent and wasted capital when the hype eventually fades. Now notice the stark contrast here on the whiteboard. On one side, we have the destructive, strip-mining vibe of the liquidator VC casino. But directly opposing that is the legitimacy VC model. This approach throws out the casino playbook entirely. Instead, it acts as a venture architecture lab, adopting a 10-year time horizon. And you might wonder, why 10 years? Because world-changing infrastructure literally cannot be rushed in a 2-year hype cycle. It's like planting a vineyard. You have to weather the early seasons to meticulously cultivate a yield that sustains and heavily compounds over time. But here's the catch. To actually build this sustainable vineyard in the real world, you can't rely on dusty, static paperwork. The sources detail some very specific legal engineering tools used to bypass that extraction layer. First, they use dynamic smart contracts to fix something called latency as legal damage. Think about it. When your fast-moving startup changes realities overnight, but a static paper contract takes 6 months and a dozen lawyers to legally amend, that delay is literal damage. Second, they use algorithmic consensus, where stakeholders invest time and tokens to reach mathematically proven agreement, rather than just letting the loudest voice in a boardroom win. And third, they utilize a legal document object model, or DOM. This transforms rigid paper contracts into a living, highly responsive operating system.
All right, on to Section 3, defining Providence VC. This is where we zoom into the actual math of it all.
So, if legitimacy VC is the broad philosophy of building trust, Providence VC is the strict, mathematically exact execution of that trust. Let's compare them. Legitimacy VC often relies on bestowing social capital based on belief. Providence VC, however, it acts more like a clinical librarian archiving undeniable truth. It relies on strict cryptographic proofs, specifically standards like ERC 7827, to ensure there is a perfect, mathematically sound record of who actually contributed what. It trades subjective human belief for objective, hard evidence.
And getting that hard evidence requires a fundamental shift in the microchip architecture itself.
The sources contrast two pieces of hardware that are inside your computer right now. First, the FPU Gambler. This unit uses floating-point approximations. It's incredibly fast, sure, but it's non-deterministic. It relies on irreversible guesswork, and that means you lose the exact chain of title of digital data. On the flip side, we have the ALU Surveyor, the arithmetic logic unit. It is strictly deterministic. It performs exact, verifiable arithmetic. 1 + 1 = exactly 2, universally, every single time. By shifting core functions to the ALU, developers achieve perfect hardware provenance. And here's why that is absolutely crucial. For Providence VC to achieve that clinical truth, it must rely on the deterministic ALU to bake undeniable chains of title directly into the silicon.
Which brings us to Section 4, text as the semiotic bridge. We've got the legal layer, we've got the hardware, but how do we interface with it? This introduces a massive interface crisis. How do we, messy, emotional human beings, communicate our complex intent to this cold, rigid hardware? Our sources impartially critique the graphical user interface, the GUI, that we all click around on every day. Legal scholar Eben Moglin notes, we get the chimpanzee hitting buttons. We trade the rich composability of language for a shiny button. I mean, think about how often we just mash shiny buttons without thinking. The critique here is that the heavy, fragile GUI layer reduces nuanced human composability to basic animalistic button mashing. Plus, if you want an AI to automate a task on a GUI, it has to use fragile screen scraping, basically taking a pixelated picture of the screen and guessing what to click. If a button moves a fraction of an inch, the whole system breaks. No way to build an economy on that.
The solution the sources present is called the semiotic bridge. This is the use of strictly formatted text, think like a JSON file or a Python script, serving as the universal deterministic interface. Text completely bypasses the bloated graphical guesswork. It is a lossless translator. It safely maps abstract human intent directly into pure physical hardware execution.
And this illustrates why that bridge is so necessary. On one side, you have OS Alpha. That's us, human cognition. It's beautifully fuzzy, associative, highly creative. We think in feelings and context. But on the other side, you have the ALU, the silicon processor. It is totally cold, rigid, and driven entirely by strict electrical voltages. It is completely blind to our intentions. Structured text is the only exact medium that can safely compile the wild imagination of OS Alpha into the rigid reality of the machine.
In practice, this works through a highly secure text-based workflow called a PTY, or pseudo-terminal channel. Step 1. It starts by opening a direct text-only pipeline right into the machine's brain. Step 2. You input natural text at the speed of thought. Step 3. The AI agent reads perfectly lossless data natively, no guessing shapes on a screen. And finally, Step 4. The agent executes the task and logs the exact provenance, the complete history of every single action it took. Nothing gets lost in translation. And that leads us to our final section, the Agentic Publishing House. This is where it all comes together. We're taking venture capital, legal engineering, hardware determinism, and the semiotic text bridge and putting them all together to completely redefine a startup. The crucial takeaway here is how this transforms the investor. Under this new model, the venture capitalist functions more like an agentic publishing house. It isn't a casino gambling on hype, it's a clinical validator. The AI does the heavy lifting of baking discrete units of truth. The digital agent establishes the strict deterministic layer. The human navigator actively orchestrates the architecture. And the VC, they provide the clinical, mathematical substrate, the ink, the paper, the compute to permanently archive the creator's effort, or what the sources call the record of sweat. Because the machine is handling the raw, tedious generation, the human's role fundamentally evolves. We shift from being manual originators, doing every little task by hand, to becoming sovereign algorithmic orchestrators. But this takes serious intentional effort. The sources call this proto-torsion, which basically means rigorous, active human steering. You have to be like a pilot aggressively correcting a plane's course, constantly forcing the machine to reject random probabilistic noise and execute your exact human intent.
So, as we embrace this entirely new agentic era, your role is no longer just generating content, it's architecting actual meaning. The physical reality of our digital economy is literally being rewritten from the microchip all the way up to the boardroom. I want to leave you with a lingering, provocative question to ponder today. As you navigate this landscape, will you act as the sovereign pilot, demanding absolute exactness and investing in the sustainable vineyard? Or will you let probabilistic noise take control in the disposable casino? The choice of how we build our digital future is entirely up to you. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Focused learners, keep questioning the systems you use and keep building.